Okay, and I see the people are joining, so let's go ahead and get started.
Yeah,
Welcome, everyone. I'm Susan Demas, the executive editor of Lincoln Square, and joining me today is Edwin Eisendrath. He is the former CEO of the Chicago Sun-Times, my hometown paper, and he currently hosts a radio show in Chicago and writes It's the Democracy Stupid Substack, which you should definitely subscribe to. But that's not all that Edwin has done. He's a former Chicago alderman. He has been a public school teacher in Chicago, a HUD regional administrator. So, looking forward to catching up with you about all of the news this week. Thank you for being here.
thank you, Susan. I'm thrilled to be here, even though I'm used to radio and a little worried about what it's going to look like when people actually see me doing this.
You know what? We're all on this ride together, and
Yep.
so far so good.
Yeah.
Well, we were talking a little bit about the No Kings protests over the weekend, and I know you were at just the massive one in Chicago. Were there like 200,000 people? What's the estimate?
You know what? I don't know what the estimate is. It was
Okay.
so big. It spilled. We have this big public square that's often used in Chicago for rallies, but it spilled out all around the streets, all around it. And 200,000 sounds uh, probably about right. I mean, I know from, previous, that square fills at 80 or 90,000 and it was everywhere. I mean, it was blocks and blocks. Um,
Yeah.
and people were thrilled to be there. I mean, you take the L downtown in Chicago,
Right.
right? The L is filled with people, packed on a Saturday, unusual.
Yeah. Usually it's like only like that if you're going to a Cubs game or something.
Right? And everybody's talking about their signs and why they're there. I mean, it was a warm and loving gathering. I don't think anybody heard what the speakers were saying, and I don't think they cared. They wanted to be there
Yeah.
because they love our country and they're angry about, the efforts to undermine it. And this is different than I'm a, pu- you know, I'm an advocate for climate justice. I'm an
Mhm.
advocate for healthcare. I'm an advocate for housing. That goes on in DC, and that's how our political parties organize. But that's not what the organizing out in the street is. It's Americans who do not want to see this country turned into a dictatorship by that felon in the White House.
Right. Yeah, I saw a lot of people who, it was their first protest. This is not, something that they, do every weekend.
Hmm.
Some people who even voted for Donald Trump, but this is not what they expected. And, God bless them. We have the right to protest still in America, and you have the right to change your mind, and everyone should be welcome into the fold.
Yes, well, this is not a doctrinaire moment. You fight this war with any soldier who's willing to stand next to you. And I'm proud to do that. I'm proud to stand with people that I disagree with,
Hmm.
but who love our country, love our democracy, and are not interested in the absolute erosion of it, which they are doing. And we should talk about what they're doing in Congress to further erode it. Because what they're doing is a crime, whether it's illegal or not, right? They're using legal means like lots of fascists do to take control.
Hmm. Right. Yeah, well, this is probably a good time for us to talk about Trump's budget bill, which, could be up for a vote in the Senate as soon as next week. And, by some accounts, the Senate version is even worse than what passed in the House. You wrote an excellent column that we published where you described the bill as putting Project 2025 into law and as a tyrant's dream come true, which I thought was a great encapsulation of the stakes of this. So, talk to us about how the bill does that.
Yeah. Well, let's first talk about how we talk about the bill.
Right,
Because again, they call it the big, beautiful bill. So we fall into the trap. We say it's the big, ugly bill. Right. But
right,
either way, that's them dictating how we talk.
right.
Right. And there are people who say it's the kill bill. I get that. And I appreciate that because it will definitely murder people for sure.
Hmm.
But what Americans understand after our last campaign is what Project 2025 is, and no one likes it. And yet this bill enacts many of its provisions. It
Right.
but it has other things. And I mean, and let's just take a minute on those provisions because they're
Yeah.
terrible, right? They strip they strip Americans of health care. They are going to poison our climate. They're going to do all those things that they promised to do. They're going to make our government um, uh, even more under the control of the executive branch than it already is.
Yeah,
And then
it's a huge power grab.
there's a provision in it that says that the judicial branch no longer has the power to hold them in contempt. And what that means is since Congress has already given up their power, they
Right.
have, but they've ceded it. They've said, we're all in with this takeover of the government, this coup. So what they've done is to the judicial branch, well, how dare they? Even our own appointees are ruling against us. We
Hmm.
just have to have the ability to ignore what they're doing. And
Right.
once they do that, in a stroke of a pen, once that's signed into law, then every executive order this tyrant puts on the plate is going to be the law of the land. We will be no different than North Korea, than any monarchy where what the king says is law. And he wants to do it. I mean, it was just 2 days ago or yesterday, 2 days ago, that he said, "Well, Great Britain is safe. Why? Because I like them." Seriously, that's how we're gonna. That's what this man is.
Hmm.
It's
Right. I mean, this is a huge rewrite of the Constitution, all in a bill. No more separation of powers. What Trump says goes. And
yeah,
I mean, that is extraordinarily radical.
it's not a rewrite. It's a burning down. It's just burn it up, right? It's just we're going to pick one man, and that man will then rule over all of us. And by the way, once he rules, you can forget ever kicking him out. That's the deal they made in Hungary. He's been there forever. That's the
Right. With Viktor Orban.
He's been there forever. Once you say to somebody, you get to make all the rules. Well, guess what? They make the rules around elections too, and your votes
Right.
don't. They have
They make
elections.
the rules so they can always win.
That's right. So elections won't matter. The media they've already got most of, not all of it. Thank goodness. There's an independent media. You're part of it. I'm part of it.
Right.
But the big legacy media has caved. They've
Yeah.
made deals that cave because they have these other corporate interests. So I want to see. I mean, by the way, one of the things I loved, and you're in this part of the country. I love the Midwest. We are not going to put up with, I have this niche that I care about, and I know how the game works, and I'm going to work and get my little niche taken care of. We're like in it to win it for the whole thing. We want it.
Mm.
We want our democracy back, and we're not going to put up with this. And
Yeah.
we're tougher than some of our counterparts on the coast. We know how to
Yeah. We have winter 6 months out of the year.
right? Yeah,
Right. And I mean, elections go through the Midwest. We know that. And so, if you're losing the heartland, then you're losing America. And I think we saw over the weekend that Trump is definitely in jeopardy of that. And so we have to build on that momentum.
yeah.
But yeah, you mentioned the media and especially with Trump's failure of a parade this weekend, where the White House said 250,000 people showed up. We all know that that's a gross exaggeration. Yet I read story after story about his massive parade. It just seems like the media just keeps bending the knee, even though the American public is getting sick of it. So, what do we do about this huge issue with, the mainstream corporate media that, is not fulfilling their duty, to be a part of this democracy, to be the guardian of the First Amendment and tell the truth?
Well, we do what you're doing and what I do. Look, Americans can find good information if they want to look for it. They have to turn off Fox. They have to turn off OCN. They have to read past the troubling headlines you see in the New York Times and the Washington Post.
Mhm.
The headline writing is appalling. Um, but we just have to hold up reality. I mean, and reality, has a nasty way of intervening. I mean, rural hospitals are going to close. Rural
Right, with all these
are going to
Medicaid
close.
cuts.
And this base of Trump's is going to go, wait, what happened? That cannot be Joe Biden's fault that rural hospitals are closing 3 years later. He can't do it. He owns this mess. And he can distract us as much as he wants by threatening to bomb Iran. Uh, you know,
Mhm.
by the way, even George Bush, after 9/11, went to Congress to get permission for the Iraq
Yes.
War, as he's required to do by law. right? So he isn't going to, I don't think he's going to violate the Constitution by declaring war himself like a king does. That, but it's a distraction in order to get this terrible bill passed, in order to take more power. And we have to keep our eye on the ball. They want legally to strip everyone of their rights and only have the king have power. And
Yes.
that's not an exaggeration. That's not nonsense. Read the bill. They're going to sell off in the Senate bill. Mike Lee, the man who was so sensitive, right? After this shooting
Right.
in Minneapolis.
About the assassinations in Minnesota.
Yes, right, he lied about it, he politicized it, he's a pig. But he also now is the head of a very important committee in Congress. He wants to sell off all our public lands. You
Yeah.
want to go to the Grand Canyon? Ask the trust if you're allowed to. The
Which
rest of
is which is what it used to be. You used to have to pay a toll if you wanted to hike down the Grand Canyon.
yeah,
He wants to bring those robber baron days back.
and sell off mandatory sale of all our public lands. So they want to, kill the healthcare system to save money. They want to not pay for any of the emergency services, FEMA, all that we do after a terrible flood, a hurricane,
Right.
that. They want to they want to spend the money on our healthcare. They don't want to spend the money on our education. They don't want to spend the money on interagency cooperation, the stuff that makes the government well. What are they saving the money for? To give billionaires more money. And let me ask you, Susan, what if you gave Elon Musk another $1 billion? What could he buy he can't buy today? It
Right.
doesn't change life, not an iota, but it
Right.
affects all the rest of our lives. That's how greedy they are.
Yeah. And the bill doesn't even pay for itself. I mean, it's going to add, trillions to our national debt, which, at one point Republicans, claimed that they cared about. But and Elon Musk's big problem with the bill is it just doesn't cut things enough. Of course, it's not the problem with the massive tax cuts that
No,
he does not need.
right. It's look. We're past the point where we can say with a straight face, well, Republicans used to say they were for, now they're against.
Hmm.
They are all in on Donald Trump's project to destroy the country, to take it over, to make it his personal piggy bank. And he
Yeah.
has already profited enormously from this job, illegally and enormously. But we can't hold him accountable because he's taken the Justice Department and made it his personal law firm.
Right.
All of this is unacceptable to the great majority of Americans who are showing up in the streets, who are wringing out their hands, going, "What am I supposed to do?" And our response is through elections, and they are on a schedule. I mean, if we could dump the man tomorrow, we would,
Right.
but we don't get to do that. But if we take back the House, maybe we will have, um, a really meaningful look at his administration, and maybe we will get the Senate to uh, have some courage. I doubt it. Because the Republican Party's dead, the one we grew up with. What's in its place?
Hmm.
It's been taken over by this autocratic monster.
Right. But being as, the next elections, for most of us, not if you're in New Jersey or Virginia, but, it's not until next fall. So in the meantime, what can we do to stop this horrible bill? Because we cannot afford for this to pass.
Well, again, we have to lean on every senator, not just the Republicans. We have to lean on the Democratic senators too. They have to fight like they have never fought because the democracy's on the line. You
Right.
give this man the powers that are in those bills, and you've just created a dictatorship. Now, dictatorships fall. Don't get me wrong. I think Americans love their democracy and ultimately will win it back. But we
Hmm.
can't call ourselves a democracy if they pass this bill. We will have given one man ultimate power to make every decision. And by the way, those decisions include coercive powers. And we're already seeing him test those limits. Oh, I'm going to send the Marines to LA. There's no emergency.
No.
As you and I are speaking, the Ninth Circuit is hearing this case, and they're likely to say the president has the power
Right.
cause, without any cause, to federalize the National Guard and use force in a jurisdiction. This is terrible. This is
Right.
absolutely terrible.
Yeah, can you imagine if this was something that Barack Obama tried to do? I mean, the Tea Party would have, had a massive collective coronary over this. But, the rules are different when you have a Republican president.
Well, we have a massive collective outpouring against it, much
Right.
bigger than the party ever had just last week.
Oh, for
America's
sure.
right. I mean, let the right wing understand this. They aren't the only ones who can organize. They aren't the only ones who can get angry. And you know what? We aren't the only ones who are going to pay a price because when we win, Mar-a-Lago will become the next Smithsonian Museum for American fascism. We'll take it away from that asshole. Pardon me. Uh,
No, you can say it.
uh, we, you know, we are going to have to say there is a price to pay when you try and take down the greatest democracy in the world, and we are going to make them pay it. By the way, I want their voices in in a working legislator because we should argue about what are the best policies to move us forward. But I'm sorry, we are not arguing about it, not ceding the democracy so that we can never have those arguments.
Yeah. And that's the thing. I mean, I have to say I share your anger. And, I think that a lot of us who believe in democracy, who might be on the, more on the left side of the spectrum, we're always trying to find common ground. We want to get along with our neighbors. We believe in the two-party system, but when you threaten everything that we hold dear, when July 4th, becomes a day of mourning instead of a day of celebration, because of what this president is trying to do to our country, that's not okay. And anger is a natural reaction to this. And, I think that that can help fuel us, as well as, leaning on those values where we do want to meet with our neighbors and talk with them and say, hey, we don't agree on everything, but we agree that this is going way too far and we need to preserve the country that we all love.
And I think, 75, 80% of the country is there, agrees on it. And the 20% who don't, I am ready to take the steamroller and roll right over them. You know what? They think the earth is flat. They think, oil will make us uh, air better forever. They're wrong. And let's call them wrong and move on. Because the right wing has been nothing will get in the way of their wanting to win. They don't care what they burn down to win. Just think about Jim Jordan's hearings over the last few years, right?
Mhm.
Oh, Hunter Biden had a laptop. I'm sorry. He had a laptop. This guy's got a Qatari jet, right? They
Right.
don't care. They do not care. But they're willing to weaponize everything and make everyone angry forever. Well, you know what? Time to call the BS and time to turn the tables because they are um, dangerous. And
Yeah.
I don't want to go where they went. I don't want to give anyone on our side license to pick up a gun and do the
Yeah.
things that they are licensing people to do. I mean, Donald Trump went on Truth Social. By the way, the Russian word for truth is Pravda. That's their news agency. Makes perfect right. Um,
Yeah.
but he went there the night of this shooting and posted that Los Angeles, Chicago, and New York are uh, taking illegal aliens and using them to win votes and try and steal our democracy. He's a liar. He is fomenting violence every step of the way. This is going to get worse before it gets better, but they are to blame. They are completely to blame. There is no middle ground on this, Susan, and we should not let them try it. What about Hunter Biden's laptop? Shut up. It's time to tell them that reality is here and they are not taking our democracy. Period.
Yeah. And yeah, I think we should talk about that because we do have this perpetual right-wing outrage machine about, everything, and it's about generating liberal tears, but it goes way beyond that because, we are seeing this growing problem of political violence on the right, and it starts with Trump dispatching, the military, along with these masked ICE agents who won't even identify themselves as they're rounding up people, including elected officials, Democratic elected officials. They're trying to push this as far as they can. But, over the weekend, as we talked about, there were these assassinations and assassination attempts against lawmakers in Minnesota, and with dozens of other lawmakers on the person's hit list. We had at least two separate instances of men who drove through No Kings protests over the weekend, one in Virginia, one in Riverside, California. And we've seen this happening with more and more frequency because there are laws passed in a lot of these red states that, basically gives people permission to do that because, they've lessened the penalty so much. And then, we on top of all of this, we have people like Mike Lee and other MAGA leaders who are just stoking the flames of violence. So, you know, uh, I think we need to talk about how dangerous the situation is, especially when you see, Trump on down condoning and trying to stoke this sort of anger. I feel like we're going to see more and more instances of violence, and that's terrifying.
I agree with you, Susan. I agree with you. Bloody Kansas was a precursor to a civil war, right? These people will have a civil war rather than have a democracy. They are just like those Southern slave enslavers who said, our power, our property matters more than anything that was ever written in the Constitution or the Declaration of Independence. We don't believe that all people are created equal. And by the way, they don't. Let's just be clear about this. I mean, they don't. Um, they're willing to be violent, and we're going to be better. There are more of us, and we're going to call them out on it. They don't get to play both sides. There aren't very good people on both sides of what happened in Minnesota. There aren't.
Um, what do we do in this moment? Because, we our power is to assemble and to keep building this movement, but clearly, Trump is willing to send in the troops to try and, put down demonstrations in LA and other places. Other people, are taking the cues, from his violent rhetoric and taking matters into their own hands. So, what do we do to be smart about everything as we're trying to fight back?
Well, be brave. Be brave. I mean, there are things that are worth fighting for. And I mean, so many of our young people over the course of our history have given their lives for this democracy. We can go out and stand out, and risk some angry people. It's worth it. Um, uh, there's this little book. It's a good book on tyranny. I suggest read it. A lot of good advice there, including don't obey. Don't because he says you have to do it. That doesn't mean you have to do it, right? We have to organize. We have to hold each other up. And by the way, you have to take time out because um, the outrage will burn us up, and we
Yeah.
aren't them. We aren't them. So take time out, read a novel, walk your dog, play the piano, sing a song, right? Stand at the beach, and then come back and fight this fight because we are in it for a long time. We have to get through uh, to at least two more elections. And we have to make sure those elections are fair and that the votes are counted. And then after they're counted, that they are meaningful. And by the way, these executive orders are groundwork for them saying you can't be seated if you were elected from Illinois into Congress because you didn't follow my executive order, which
Mm,
have to make it impossible for women to vote if they have a different last name than the one they were born with.
right.
I mean, this is stuff they're really doing
Yeah.
and they're really planning on using. So we need to be smart, but we need to be tough and we need to care about each other. And by the way, that um, protest this weekend was lovely. I mean, they are angry with Donald Trump, but they love this democracy and they're supporting each other and helping each other through it, because people are angry and they're upset. So I think we're going to be okay, but we have to be, as tough as you and I and these Midwesterners who suffer through these winters are, right? And not ideological and not narrow focused on one issue or another that you're willing to horse trade over, but laser focused on the big picture. This is what matters. We need to save this democracy for all the other reasons. And um, I don't know, Lincoln was from here.
Yes. We're big fans.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, Yeah, and I would like to talk just, before we go about your governor, JB Pritzker, because
Hmm.
he's first of all, he's an actual billionaire. And he has really emerged as being on the front lines of opposing Trump, drawing on his family history of, fleeing from the Ukraine and the pogroms. And, it seems to me like he's really kind of met this moment. What is it like as someone who lives in Illinois, and, do you think that he has, a role to play in 2028 on the national stage?
Well, let me just start with a full disclosure. I've known JB since we were both little, uh,
Yeah.
and um, a- uh, and I'm fond of him. He's very smart. His he may come from a billionaire family, but it's a family with very good values.
Mhm,
Um, that doesn't so he didn't grow up like everybody else because you don't if you're a billionaire. But they've
mhm,
got the good values, and that matters, and it makes him different than I don't know Eric Trump,
mhm,
right? Um, uh, he has chosen this lane, the lane of tip of the spear.
mhm,
Uh, and I don't know what will ultimately um, uh, produce our standard bearer at the next election. We're going to have a primary, and it's going to be contested, and JB will be a formidable candidate if he decides to run. But we have a habit of picking more centrist candidates in our primaries. Joe Biden wasn't, uh, the most progressive candidate when he
mhm.
ran. Neither was Barack Obama.
Yeah,
Uh, certainly Hillary wasn't more progressive than Bernie. You
right.
know, we pick candidates who have really broad appeal and can win.
Mhm.
And winning is important. And Jay, the guy, he may be, but I'm not smart enough to know what our primaries are going to look like in a couple of years. Um, uh, but right now, I'm thrilled that he is out there, um, calling this man out in the White House and not cowing, not bowing down, not being cowed, but being as tough as he is. I'm very proud of that.
Great. Well, I so appreciate you joining us today. I know we could go on and on. There's so much to talk about. And so I hope you'll come back because I have a feeling that the news is not going to stop. And I really love these conversations with you.
Thank you, Susan. I enjoy talking to you as well. And obviously, it's a topic that matters enormously to us both. I can't believe the time flew by as fast as it did.
Great. Well, thank you. And check out Edwin's Substack. It's The Democracy Stupid. You can subscribe. He wrote about that Mar-a-Lago becoming a museum, which we republished. But you should check out the full thing. It's great.
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you.
I
Bye.